You are about to listen to the Dr. Dahlia Show. Sassy, stimulating medical talk radio. Any medical advice Dr. Dahlia Wax gives on her show should not be substituted for an actual visit to your medical provider. And now, here's Dr. Dahlia.
All right, we are back on the Dr. Dahlia Show, 1-877-DOC-DALI, 1-877-DOC-DALI. So one of the things that I think we picked up on years ago is why there's this climate change fight. And you have people saying we got to protect the environment. I love the environment. I work for the EPA. I love PETA, protecting animals. I think the environment, our animals are extremely, if we don't be aware of what we could be doing to our environment, it's devastating. However, what has been suggested in the name of climate change and policy has been causing a lot of us, especially with a scientific background, to go, wait a second. You're saying that's going to help the environment, but that could hurt the environment. And when we saw this little boy write his congresswoman about how climate change is going to kill millions, frightening that these kids are feeling that burden. That's scary for that. I mean, when I learned about, Holocaust killing millions, I couldn't sleep at night. That was causing nightmares. So these kids thinking that climate change is going to kill millions, where we have to, he approached his congresswoman where we need to do more electric vehicles, etc. The issue I have is I don't think we have a consensus on what's going to help or hurt the environment. Because what we're seeing is study after study. What we do to help the environment in one way ends up spanking us and hurting us, the environment, in another way. And that there's these unintended consequences. And then we got to be careful what we ask for. Now, like, for example, the no plastic bag rule in California. A lot of us don't like extra plastics. I'd like to save the oceans. I think less plastic is great. I understand why we moved to plastic, to get away from paper, to save the trees. But we use a lot of plastic. However, what people didn't realize is that homeless people use that plastic to avoid spreading communicable disease. When they potty in a like a bean can or things like that, they would use bags for the excrement. So after the plastic bag ban, there was this big hepatitis outbreak. I believe there was one in San Diego. And so San Diego health officials had to do what? Start passing out plastic bags. Right? When in California, they wanted to preserve tree lines and they didn't want to cut down trees for power lines, they started to have issues where the power lines were too close to the trees, such that when there was a fire, now we have not that protective barrier that could cause tree fires. And I love trees. I don't want to see trees get burned down, but if you got to cut a tree line more to protect that, I want to do whatever we can to protect wildfires. So what evidence do we have that the electric vehicle is safer for the environment or not? Well, we have the evidence on fossil fuels. We know that fossil fuels hurt the environment. But what are we seeing with the tire? What are we seeing with the weight of the vehicle? I keep hearing from environmentalists that we're too heavy on the ground. We have too much on the ground and we're heating the ground. One of the reasons why we're having global warming is because we have too many people and businesses and cars. Your electric vehicle car is a lot heavier than our, 70s Camaro. So, are we really doing the research and lithium batteries and setting up all these electrical conduits and, is that helping the environment? And of course, what nobody is talking about is the fire risk, where when an electric vehicle is stuck in a storm, flooded, or in a Pacific Palisades fire, and it's charging in these houses, you can't put out the fire. And then the fires just continue to burn and continue to burn and continue to burn. It takes at least an hour with tens of thousands of gallons of water to put out one single electric vehicle fire. Well, then what about the water? I know people are like, well, Dahlia, are you right, left? I'm very pro-environment. I'm pro-trees. I'm pro-water. I'm pro-oxygen. I don't think an electric vehicle is pro-oxygen, pro-water. You have to use a lot of water. China wanted to farm and cultivate a lot of trees. I love planting trees. I think trees are awesome. But this is what they found happened. Right? Again, this is why we need to kind of think about things. What they did was they planted, this was an effort to plant 116,000 square miles of trees. They want to increase the country's total forest coverage from 10% in 1949 to 25% in 2024. But a study published in Earth's Future showed that all of those additional trees came with unforeseen consequences for their China's water distribution. Apparently, scientists looked at these were scientists from Tianjin University and China Agricultural University in Beijing and Utrecht University in Netherlands found that between 2001 and 2020, increased vegetation reduced water resources in both the eastern monsoon region and the northwestern arid region, which was a big deal because those areas comprise 74% of China's total land area. And the regreening efforts like the Great Green Wall, along with other efforts, caused evapotranspiration, which is I guess we have evaporation and transpiration where plants release water vapor through tiny pores of their stomata. That shift caused changes in precipitation, directing more moisture to the Tibetan plateau. They got more water, but the eastern or northwestern China experienced a decrease in water availability, with the northwest losing the most due to substantial moisture. So here you are trying to improve your grasslands and forests, but you might be actually making droughts somewhere else. And see, I took climate classes. I wish I took more. I wish I had time to take more because I love our environment. I love, protecting the earth. But you got to be really careful with what you're doing. When we built these solar panels and we heard birds were dying, I don't want to kill the birds. I mean, I understand solar energy and I understand there are going to be some consequences to nature. But every time you build, these climate change sort of entities like solar farms and wind farms, it disrupts the natural habitat. And now you're displacing animals and now you're displacing species. So we got to pick one. Are we for the environment? Or is it about climate change policy? And we got to, look at the science and figure out what exactly we can do to protect the earth. But don't be screwing over our animals, our trees, other grasslands, other areas in the name of climate change without, understanding that what we could do could be making things worse. 1-877 Doc Dolly, don't go away.
This is an urgent announcement for anyone that's $10,000 or more in debt. Before you make another minimum payment, you need to know there are special programs that can completely free you of your debt. Total Financial Freedom can help you become debt-free in months instead of years. Resolve your credit card debt, signature loans, department store cards, internet loans, and timeshares. Call Total Financial Freedom now at 800-878-6020 for a free consultation. For 16 years, Total Financial Freedom has helped thousands get out of debt. You can feel confident when calling because Total Financial Freedom is A+ rated by the Better Business Bureau. Battling for years and years stuck in the endless cycle of minimum payments could take decades. You have the right to get your debt resolved and substantially reduce your monthly payments. Call Total Financial Freedom now at 800-878-6020. That's 800-878-6020. 800-878-6020.
Let's face it, guys, we're living in times where the truth is becoming more suppressed and censorship is increasing at an alarming rate, especially on social media platforms. It's Clyde, and I want to tell you about a safe and secure digital playground we put together just for you. It's aftermath.media. You get access to thousands of Ground Zero archives and podcasts, along with our private social media groups with your basic membership starting at only $7 a month. Each subscription includes tech support, access to the RSS feeds, along with our own chat room and Telegram channel. In addition, the premium membership includes research study groups, webinars, a document and movie library, a live video stream of Ground Zero, a monthly Zoom chat with me, and other bonus content. Be sure to check out our yearly specials as well. Sign up today while you're thinking about it. Sign up at aftermath.media. Again, that's aftermath.media.
tuning in. 1-877-DOC-DOLLY, 1-877-DOCDALI. Big thanks to Talk Media Network for making the show happen. Big thanks to Daniel, our producer, and big thanks to y'all for tuning in. We really do appreciate it. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Dr. Dahlia spelled out, Facebook, The Dr. Dahlia Show, and on YouTube, click like and subscribe. So we have some breaking news. President Donald Trump has endorsed Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton over incumbent Senator John Cornyn for the Texas Senate race. They are on the ballot in a runoff election next Tuesday, even though there's multiple primaries now going on today. But their election is next Tuesday after neither Republican candidate reached a 50% threshold in the state's March primary. Trump wrote in a Truth Social post that Paxton had always been loyal to him, while Cornyn was not supportive of me when times were tough. He says, therefore, Ken Paxton has my complete and total endorsement to be the next United States Senator from the great state of Texas. So he said he was going to watch the race and wait to give his endorsement, but the runoff election is in 1 week, so he has to move. He has done very well with many of his endorsements winning in the primary. We're going to see what happens with the Congressman Massey in Kentucky, who he doesn't endorse, but I believe is leading. And it's going to be every election season we say this is going to be more dramatic, it's going to be more crucial, and it is. The fight is getting more crucial. I mean, it went from repeal and replace Obamacare and economy policies to now Democrats want to add more states. Democrats want to add more Supreme Court justices. This is the makeup of government is changing. And it's changing pretty quickly. The makeup of our schools and the bathrooms and the gyms and sports. It's a much different world now. As much as I support the LGBTQAI plus community, I support women in sports. And if they don't, want to compete against a biological male, they shouldn't have to. That's pretty common sense. And if transgender individuals want to, participate in sports, they can, but with their biological counterpart. It's unfair to be biologically male and competing in female sports. All the progress we made in female sports showing, women can also play basketball. They can play flag football. They can play hockey. It starts to change when you change the makeup of the team where, they're going to identify as a girl. So kind of hurting women's rights. I thought we all kind of agreed that we want women to be able to have opportunities too. So it's a different world now. And it's just, and even though there sadly has always been political assassination attempts and riots and wars, and it's now becoming more mainstream to call for that. People joking that Trump didn't die in his attempts. People saying that these assassination attempts are fake. What's going on here? This is crazy. Now, I believe the Democrats had a primary in early March. They had House Representative James Talarico, who beat Jasmine Crockett. He was the one that said there are 6 sexes. When you look at X, X, XY, XXY, and that's him. And he tried to be more moderate, but then he wanted to make sure he appealed to the progressives. And he is now, I believe, now running for Senate, and he would be up against Cornyn or Ken Paxton. So we'll see what happens with this. Everybody's saying if Trump's endorsements win, it shows that people like him. As I've always said, I really think people should be voting for who they think is going to represent them. But I don't want people just voting all D, all R. If look at our governor. Our governor, it was interesting with in Nevada election because we had still very democratically leaning senator races and representative races, but the governor clearly won early on as Republican. So, I know some people suggested that was kind of odd because the majority of people vote all D and all are. But no, I think Lombardo had a lot of shall we say, popularity, and so you can see some states vote Republican, vote. He's moderate, but you can see some states where they will embrace both Democratic and Republican representatives. They say a survey found that Ken Paxton, moving on to general election, would move about 2% of Cornyn's voters to Tallarico's column, but that's, I don't think, not enough for him to lose. I think the Texas Senate is still going to be going to the Republicans, so we'll see what happens. The mayor race in L.A. is fascinating. You're watching Mayor Bass, Spencer Pratt, who are probably going to be the one. What's interestingly with California is they call it jungle primary, where the top two leaders in the polls go on to duke it out. So as opposed to you having Republican contenders going after Republicans and Democrats going after Democrats, it's the top two get to move forward. And usually with, I believe, most Democratic, most races in LA, they're Democrat. But Spencer Pratt has really started to get popular. And his videos showing, look, this is what is, look at the drugs, look at the parks. This is not my town. This is not the LA I grew up in. I was born in LA. I mean, I remember Zuma Beach. You had to still be careful where you stood, but you really didn't have a lot of needles and things like that. Now it's like I tell everybody, you got to be very, very careful where you step because there could be hypodermic needles on the just lying there on the beach, because a lot of homeless people go to the beaches at night. I don't blame them. The beach is amazing, but unfortunately, some that might be using drugs can, unfortunately, get into your bloodstream. So, Spencer Pratt he's using AI. He's being very creative with his Hollywood background. And I want to apologize. I never really watched any of his shows. I don't watch a lot of reality TV. I did with Pawn Stars because I was on it. But I didn't really have time to watch a lot of reality TV. As Ronald Reagan, appealed to Californians with his Hollywood background, Spencer Pratt is trying to too. Now, he's no Ronald Reagan, but he's really, shall we say, engaging his listeners by saying, look, why are we doing this? Why are we, why are we allowing this to still happen? Where is our money going to? Also, what's interesting is, he's up against Karen Bass, who, with the Palisades fiasco, where they were not prepared with the winds coming. She was out of town. Her being out of town doesn't bother me as much as her not warning everybody to move their electric vehicles out of their cars and away from the fires. Her not making sure that we had funding for the firefighters and not defunding. Her not making sure our water reservoirs were full and ready to work and go. That bothers me even more than anything else. But interestingly, Nitya Raman, who's also running, which we don't believe is going to probably make it through the primary, is a city council member. And she suggested that we need to stop backyard barbecues. It's 4th of July, it's summertime. People can't really afford to travel because gas prices are higher. So we're going to stay home and have a barbecue. That's kind of what we do. It's the American way. It's America's 250th. She thinks we should ban them because it's a high fire danger. That would direct city officials to consider emergency restrictions on grilling during red flag warning days when you have high winds, dry conditions. Now, I don't know how many fires are started by barbecues. I understand with camping, and I understand with some of the individuals that just decided to start lighting things up like they did with the Palisades fire last January. But how many times does your backyard barbecue really cause a wildfire? So she brings that up, which isn't really... In fact, Councilmember Monica Rodriguez says the last thing Angelinos need is a ban on hosting a carne asada in their own backyard. Yeah, she is the running third in the Los Angeles mayor primary. I don't think she understands that the average American who is not wealthy that can go to a fancy fireworks show is going to have a barbecue that day or for Father's Day. And that's what, you get the families together. Everybody brings some food. The kids play. splash around in the kiddie pool or whatever, jacuzzi, do some fireworks. That's kind of how, we do it when we don't have a lot of money and we want to, enjoy family time. And you're going to ban the barbecue. No wonder Spencer Pratt's doing well in the polls. 1-877 Doc Dolly, don't go away.
Hi, everyone. If you've been injured in an accident and think you deserve compensation, listen up. We have legal professionals standing by right now to answer your questions for free. They'll tell you if you have a case and how much it's potentially worth. Call 800-710-5100. I'm here with spokesman John Wolf. So, John, tell our listeners who should call right now.
Well, Maria, first off, thank you for having me join you to answer the listeners' questions. Now, as far as who should call in, anyone who's been injured in an accident and think you deserve compensation, give us a call right now and find out how much your case is potentially worth. Call 800-710-5100.
Thanks, John. You heard it, folks. If you think you deserve compensation, call now to find out how much you qualify for. 800-710-5100.
Advertisement sponsored by Legal Help Center. May not be available in all states.
On the Dr. Dahlia Show, 1-877 Doc Dolly, 1-877 DOCDALI. So, I'm watching these drug prices, and I'm watching what's been going on. So, we've been able to make some huge headway, and I do credit Trump for that. We're going to the drug companies, asking them to charge us less. And for those individuals who were paying $1,100 a month for their Ozempic, they've been able to get that down to $300, $400, $500 a month. Huge. Still think you guys are overpaying for the drug, but at least it's cheaper. But Eli Lilly makes Ozempic, and Novo Nordisk, and then you have Zepbound. Eli Lilly, I believe, makes Zepbound and Mounjaro. Well, the Supreme Court has declined on Monday to hear a challenge by drug maker Eli Lilly to a Civil War era whistleblower law that has recovered billions of dollars by allowing private individuals to bring fraud lawsuits on behalf of the federal government. And the justices decided to turn away Lilly's appeal of a lower court's ruling that upheld a $183 million judgment arising from a whistleblower lawsuit accusing the drug maker for defrauding Medicaid. Eli Lilly had argued that handling government power to private citizens in this manner violates the U.S. Constitution. This is being brought by Reuters. The case stemmed from a 2014 whistleblower lawsuit brought against Eli Lilly by Ronald Strack, a lawyer and pharmacist, accused the company of shortchanging drug rebates to Medicaid, which is the health insurance company for low-income individuals funded by states and the federal government. Eli Lilly denied doing that. Strack sued under the False Claims Act, a law that allows private individuals to sue on the government's behalf and share in recoveries through its so-called qui tam mechanism. Or qui tam is an abbreviation for a Latin phrase meaning who sues on behalf of the king as well as for himself. So that is interesting. I'm wondering why not in 2014, if there was this alleged fraud, why didn't the Obama administration then address it? Why did it take a lawyer and a pharmacist to do that? The False Claims Act, also known as Lincoln's Law, was passed in Congress and signed by Abraham Lincoln in 1863, prompted by defense contractors billing the government for non-existent or worthless supplies provided to the Union Army during the Civil War. The law was later strengthened into law in 1986. Now, in 2022, a federal jury found that Eli Lilly knowingly concealed that it had retroactively increased prices on some drugs and then failed to rebate Medicaid on the higher prices. A jury awarded $61 million in damages which then tripled to $183 million under the False Claims Act. The Chicago-based 7th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the jury verdict in 2025. That's why the company decided to take it to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court said, we're not touching this one. Eli Lilly said the whistleblower provisions in the Federal False Claims Act violate the U.S. Constitution by placing too much federal executive power in the hands of people who are not accountable to the U.S. president. I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, again, my answer to any of this is the U.S. government should be doing their job. 2014, Obama was in office. He should have done something if there was alleged fraud. So their lawyer said fundamentally executive authorities bestowed upon private citizens. Oh, sorry about this. Hold on a second. Oh, these pop-ups are ridiculous. With no meaningful supervision or direction, transforming bounty hunters into ersatz executive officers and paying them and their private attorneys a pretty penny in the process. None of that is consistent with their constitutional structure. So the U.S. government recovered more than $6.8 billion in settlements and judgments in False Claims Act cases during the 2025 fiscal year, and Qui Tam whistleblowers were awarded more than $330 million. So it's almost like they are doing their, the government's job for them, and they get a piece. Yeah, it doesn't look good either way. And the one thing that I really struggle with is in medicine, we have a lot of settlements for cases that don't go to court. And this is something that I have been very, very grateful to never have to face. But I'm told that doctors feel like they're forced to settle, which is not an admission of guilt, but they want to fight a false accusation. And I'm not saying what happened with Eli Lilly. This is now a different subject. I don't know what happened with Eli Lilly and Medicaid and all that. But doctors are forced to settle because if they try to fight it and lose, their insurance company won't help them. So with the average malpractice case, if you, let's say, have an outcome that, it really wasn't your fault. They really can't prove negligence. And you're like, come on, man, this wasn't me. Yeah, it's not like I cut off the wrong leg or denied them a test. There was a bad outcome. We have informed consent. So like, for example, I believe, I have to look this up. I think there was a woman who had a hysterectomy and the vaginal canal left after her hysterectomy was a lot shorter, not as deep. So it affected sex functioning. And so they sued the doctor. And they were successful in suing the doctor or getting a huge settlement because the jury or they felt that everybody was going to feel sorry for her when and I don't know if the hysterectomy was done inappropriately or not, but because the vaginal canal was not a few, I guess, millimeters more, that it affected her ability to have sex. And I understand that. But rather than a doctor saying, look, we did the best we could, you had a low-lying uterus, or we treated you for cancer, we did what we could, it was safer for them in the long run to just settle. So your malpractice company, if you get sued, I've never been sued, thank God, but what happens is they look at the case. And if they say, look, we don't think this is fightable, we don't think a jury will go your way, it doesn't matter how innocent you are, so we choose to settle. And you say, no, don't settle. That goes on my record. The medical board then thinks I did something wrong when I did it. I want to fight this to the end, tooth or nail. The malpractice company has a choice to decline covering you then. And they could say, look, if you lose, we're not paying. We made our recommendation. Now, remember, your malpractice company is an insurance company. So if they at all think it's going to cost them money to go to trial, and it's cheaper for them to pay out 25 or 30 grand, they're going to just do that. And so doctors are very stressed. That's why a lot of them leave the field, because they're like, wait a second, I did nothing wrong. I'm going to fight this. Hell no. And I'm going to fight it as much as I can. And unfortunately, the malpractice company says, well, then we're out. You have no coverage. So these doctors are forced to, well, then I have to settle, but that's not cool. That's not cool. And so when you hear a lot of these companies settle, like, for example, I don't know if it was Walgreens, but there was a pharmaceutical chain that got in trouble for the fentanyl crisis. Not because they did anything wrong in terms of bringing fentanyl into the country. It's they filled doctor prescriptions like they're supposed to by law. So the lawyers had an easier time going after them than the doctors. So they sued the company saying, look, you actually filled prescriptions. They're like, what are we supposed to do? If we don't fill the prescription, we get in trouble. What are you talking about? So the pharmacies got in trouble. And so rather than go through, they went for the settlement. And it's sadly, it's a game that a lot of people play. Now, there are many people going, okay, well, I'm going to now just try to get a settlement. Lawyers are smart. They know when a settlement is BS. And a settlement actually is less, oftentimes in a malpractice case, than you could get going for broke. But people who think, oh, I could say my scar is settlement worthy, oftentimes that won't go. So, already I think everybody's kind of tried that. So it still has to be a valid case. But, when you hear, so the problem I have is seeing the other side of people trying to pitch cases and it go to settlement. When I hear that a doctor settled, either they were really, really guilty and there was no way they could defend themselves, or the case was such BS that their malpractice company forced them into just settling. 1-877-Doc-Dolly, don't go away.
Carl Amari here to tell you about our newest website for old-time radio lovers. It's 100radioshows.com. At this site, there are 5 old-time radio shows waiting for you to download free as our gift to you, and be sure to browse the additional 700 old-time radio shows available to you for 70% off by using the promo code RADIO at checkout. This is a limited-time offer, so log on to 100radioshows.com. That's 100radioshows.com.
Have you ever thought you'd like to buy and sell houses but didn't know how or where to get the money? My name is Ron LeGrand, and over the past 40 years, I've bought over 3,000 houses without using my money or credit and taught thousands to do the same. Today, even in a virtual environment, we buy nice houses in nice neighborhoods using no banks, realtors, contractors, or other costly entanglements, and build huge cash flow and wealth without the hassle of tenants, all without credit and little or no money. You don't need a license or experience, and I'll show you exactly how it's done. Text FREE to 99799, and I'll send you my free training. I promise you I'll change the way you think about real estate and open the door to a new lifestyle that doesn't involve risk or rehabs and can quickly replace your current income. Text FREE to 99799, and let me show you how to take your life back and build cash flow and wealth from your home. That's FREE to 99799. Again, FREE to 99799.
Dr. Dahlia here. Are you tired, burned out, gaining weight, succumbing to the daily pressures of life? Well, how's your dopamine doing? How you feel right now, how you'll feel an hour from now, and how you'll feel next week is completely reliant on your dopamine. Our daily motivation and willingness to push through challenges depends on the intricate chemical process dopamine provides. Christian Kalikas and I created Deploying Dopamine, a book that tells you what dopamine is, when it dysfunctions, and how to successfully deploy it when needed. Find Deploying Dopamine on Amazon today. Check it out. We are back on the Dr. Dolly Show. Thank you all for tuning in. 1-877 Dolly, 1-877-DOCDALI. I don't like drama. I can't stand drama. And the Supreme Court, you would think, would be free of some drama. And no, we're getting a lot more rumors and things coming out of that where they could probably do a TV show on some of the BS that happens. Look at what the Roe v. Wade overturn. Somebody leaked it, and there's some issues going on in there. And apparently, liberal Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson has kind of opened up to some of the tensions that are in the Supreme Court. And she warned that the court is risking looking partisan after the voting rights ruling that had to do with gerrymandering and districts based on race. And she said to the American Law Institute in D.C., it is so important for the public to perceive us as neutral, nonpartisan. We know that public confidence is really all the judiciary has. I agree with her that the Supreme Court has to look nonpartisan, but she always seems to vote one partisan way, though. I really dislike the fact that the Supreme Court looks partisan. It really bothers me. You have conservative judges, you have liberal-leaning judges. You do see Gorsuch, Chief Justice John Roberts. You've seen Amy Coney Barrett not always rule in the GOP favor. And they're doing their job in that respect, although I don't like what Chief Justice John Roberts did with Obamacare. It was ruled unconstitutional. But instead he said, well, this is how you could fix it to make it constitutional. Well, it would have been nice. Yeah, if it was unconstitutional, just say it's unconstitutional. Let them figure out how to fix it. Because now we're stuck with it and it's really ruined our healthcare system. But that's a different discussion for a different day. But, some of you had asked what actually happened? What's going on here with Louisiana? What did that, how did somebody make a congressional district race based, and aren't many places doing that with the Voting Rights Act? So when you look, and again, I am no legal analyst here, all right, but the congressional district, I think the congressional district in question was the 6th. And it was a majority black district to comply with Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which allows racial gerrymandering. And the legislator drew a 250-mile gerrymander, salamander type oddly shaped district that connected populations in Shreveport, Alexandria, Baton Rouge to ensure that black voters had the opportunity to elect a candidate of their choice. Following the 2020 census, Louisiana's black population was 33%, but only one of its 6 congressional districts was drawn to be majority black. Civil rights groups sued. So they created a second district. In response to court orders, the legislature passed Senate Bill 8 in 2022 to create a second majority black district, hence CD6. Lawmakers used race to group the separate neighborhoods and be able to make that congressional district shape to include them. Well, the Supreme Court on April 29, 2026 said you can't do that. All right? That's using race. The ruling Louisiana versus Clay said that race predominated the drawing of the district and that Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act did not require Louisiana to use race as the basis for drawing such an expansive race-conscious district. So they ruled that you're not supposed to use race. You can't just make an all-white. You can't just say, no, I want to have this white and we're going to not allow black vote, Hispanic vote. That's why there's that protections in there. Now, you guys might know more about the Voting Rights Act than I do. Section 2, will sometimes, I guess, suggest that, you redraw districts to make sure race gets represented. They don't want to dilute minority votes. And so to prevent vote dilution, they say, sadly, minority communities were crammed into a single district to limit their overall influence or split up against multiple districts. The Voting Rights Act aimed to stop that. The minority majority districts comply with them. They say map makers are sometimes legally compelled to draw districts with specific racial demographics in mind. This way, minority voters, they say, have a fair and equal opportunity. But the 14th Amendment doesn't allow that. 14th Amendment says you can't use race as a predominant factor in drawing electoral districts. Why? Because that hurt. That hurt races, such as minority races. You can't say, look, we're not going to allow this race to be represented. And so the law meant to protect now is being kind of rewritten to say, no, you can do that, but only in this case. Well, once you have that in play, then somebody can manipulate it and use it, again, to hurt minorities. And so when the Supreme Court looked, and again, their job is to look at if there's a constitutional conflict and what, if you're using race, what we're seeing is, whether it's using race to determine who you're going to accept to medical school, using race to get a job, using race to determine. Like when Biden said, I am going to choose a woman as my vice president. He shouldn't have said that. He should have just said, I'm going to choose the best person. If it ended up being a woman, then great. But we don't want, okay, I see what you have to do there, Biden. You have to separate every single other competitor and filter down just these applicants to, once you look like you're doing manipulation to pick and choose somebody, it's then, now you're discriminating based on race, creed, gender, sex, etc. But if you say I'm going to pick the best person, then you end up picking a woman. So that's where they're struggling with this. In terms of the Supreme Court, it has been obvious that there are conservative leaning, liberal leaning, and maybe that happens because of whoever appoints them and nominates them and then gets them appointed in their term, whether it's Biden or Obama or Trump or Bush. And I think that's frustrating. Judges are supposed to be judges. They're supposed to be neutral, not supposed to be, all right, here we go. This is going to help the Democratic Congress, or this is going to help the Republican leading Congress. So we're going to choose. No, that's not what they're supposed to do. But it is kind of frustrating because Ketanji Brown Jackson seems to be, I don't know if there's been a couple things where unanimously the Supreme Court all agreed on something, but for the most part, they always seem to be split. And she always seems to vote with Sotomayor and Kagan. And it's like, how do people interpret the law so differently, but so consistently differently? What is so different about the liberal lens view from the conservative lens view? If the Constitution says you can't use race, you can't use race. That's not, these are just, if the Constitution says, you can't vote if you're illegally here. I mean, these are things that and I understand there's interpretation. People interpret the Bible, people interpret, but unfortunately you get laws passed, and then, okay, well, what takes precedence? And so, we don't want people to look at the Supreme Court as right versus left. But unfortunately, with the way everybody seems to vote, we are seeing it. And how do we fix that? Do we have more moderates? We're not going to be happy with every judge, but our judges are supposed to go in with an open mind, no predetermined bias, nothing like that. That's why when the UCLA law students were booing and harassing a speaker, I'm like, wait a second. I thought you were about freedom of speech. I thought, you guys want to be lawyers and judges. Is that what you're going to do if you don't like what a witness says? You're going to sit there and boo and hold signs and call them Nazis? 1-877-Doc-Dolly. Don't go away.
Can you believe, with all the recent violent protests, looting, and destruction, some areas are considering either defunding or abolishing the police? At a time when America's neighborhoods need the protection of police the most, some elected officials would rather create more chaos by playing politics. If you're sick of elected officials caving in to demands of the radical left, you're not alone. It's time we stand up and declare our support for local police. The majority of police officers are important partners in protecting our God-given rights. If you prefer freedom over chaos, then learn how you can help protect the local police that serve your community. Call today and request your free Support Your Local Police info packet. Dial 800-JBS-USA-1. That's 800-JBS-USA-1. Request your free Support Your Local Police info packet by calling 800-JBS-USA-1 today.